You look at your bank account, you see money arriving, and the first thought is, this won't last, it will be gone soon. That is the automatic reflex of people who deeply believe life is scarce and the universe serves only crumbs. I spot them right away. They are the ones who, even when something good happens, are already rehearsing the next deprivation, as if the world were on permanent rationing. Today I will dismantle the mind of those people. I'm not here to soothe anyone. I'm here to show how that pattern of thinking sabotages the capacity to receive abundance. I'll explain exactly how a scarcity belief programs the subconscious to reject prosperity, and how that creates a vicious loop that confirms a limited view of life. More important, I will reveal how to begin breaking that mental pattern and take the first steps to reprogram your relationship with abundance. Because it isn't the universe serving you crumbs, it's you using a tiny plate. Have you ever caught yourself saying, "This is too good to last," while holding the little you have? That opening scene looks small, but it is telling. When someone glances at a deposit and prepares for loss, they are not reacting to the balance. They are acting out a story that lives in their nervous system. I say story because that's what it is, a recurring narrative that runs without permission. It colors perception, it shapes feeling, and it orders behavior. Most of these people call themselves realists. They say they are practical, grounded, and clear-eyed about risk. They take pride in seeing through fantasies. But this self-image is a protective costume. It hides a different engine. Underneath the realist label lives a running logic. If I expect scarcity, I will be prepared. Expectation equals survival. That feels sensible. It feels moral. It feels adult. But sensible choices made from fear become a life built to conserve the small rather than grow the possible. Listen, what someone tells others is not what runs their life. Publicly they say, "I prefer stability. I don't want to be reckless." Privately they rehearse worst-case scenarios like prayers. They keep spreadsheets with worst-case assumptions. They brag at dinner about not being tempted by luxuries, while counting pennies for basic needs. They tell themselves stories to sleep. If I hold tight, I will be safe. Those stories are soothing, until they are not. Here is how that split shows up in daily life. A promotion arrives. Out loud they say, "That's great." And then their mind goes to clauses in the contract, to taxes, to the idea that a raise will make them a target for disappointment. So they underplay their interest. They send cautious emails. They show up smaller than they could. An unexpected inheritance appears. They stash it under a mattress of caution, refusing to touch investment possibilities. A friend offers a collaboration. They say yes, and then delay key contributions until the window closes. Each time, fear shapes the move. The contradiction is obvious when you watch closely. They claim they crave security. Every action, however, produces insecurity. The habit of hoarding time, attention, money, and emotion yields the very instability they fear. They think they are protecting themselves. Instead, they are building scarcity into the architecture of their lives. What do they say about people who do the opposite? They call them naive, reckless, or lucky. They will say, "Some people take risks and get rich. That works for them." The tone is almost resentful, like a moral superiority veil. But listen to the underside. The real message they tell themselves is, "But that could be me who loses everything if I try." That internal "but" is the seat of the whole problem. Now, how does this show up in relationships? In conversation, someone will say, "I don't need much," presented like a virtue. But when you watch their interactions, you see a different currency. They rarely share resources. They seldom ask for help. They refuse to delegate because they fear losing control. Their friendships and partnerships become transactional and cautious. They measure favors and keep scores. They believe generosity is risky because if they give too much, there will not be enough left. So they rehearse scarcity even in love. There is a small, obvious ritual I see across homes and offices. The drawer full of just-in-case items. the pantry with canned goods stacked like a fortress, the emergency fund that is never invested. These are physical metaphors for the inner life. They mark a person who has decided to live one step ahead of ruin. It looks practical, but it feels like a sentence. The language they use is also revealing. Their vocabulary is full of limits. I can't. I shouldn't. Not now. Better safe. These little words are like anchors. They pull a life to a certain shore. Think of how much of our lives is decided by those tiny responses. A career pivot, a new romantic risk, a creative gamble, most of them die under the weight of that cautious lexicon. You might be thinking this is compassionless. It's not. I am both accusatory and compassionate at once. I say these things because I have seen the long costs. I have watched people avoid abundance with a seriousness that borders on religious. It becomes a creed. They will teach it to their children like a moral. Work hard, don't get carried away. It's a small doctrine that becomes destiny. Now imagine watching this pattern over decades. The small choices add up. Missed raises accumulate. Ignored investments never compound. Opportunities vanish quietly. Meanwhile, the person believes they are virtuous, not trapped. That self-deception is the cruelest part because it keeps them comfortable in a false morality and prevents honest interruption. I want you to see the structural anatomy of this habit. It has 3 parts. First, a narrative of scarcity. Second, an emotional economy built around vigilance. Third, behaviors that protect the small and exclude the possibility of expansion. Each supports the others. It's a neat and efficient machine. It runs on autopilot. It does not need external catastrophe to justify itself because it manufactures plenty of internal catastrophe. This is why the contrast between talk and action is so sharp. They will rail against greed and excess. They will say things like, money corrupts. They will separate themselves from people who openly pursue wealth. That posture looks admirable until you notice they also refuse to invest in their own growth. They decline courses, refuse coaching, avoid prices that feel too high for transformation. They endorse simplicity as a moral practice while abandoning leverage and skill development. At the center of all this is identity. They are protecting who they think they are. I am someone who survives on little, they say, as if survival were heroism. Hear me, surviving is not the same as living. Their identity becomes a lock. They cannot allow abundance because it would force a redefinition of self. Who are they if they are not the careful one? Who will they be if money flows without panic? This fear of redefinition is powerful. Let me map out a few scenes that make this painfully concrete. Picture a woman with a stable job who discovers a side project that could scale. She is fascinated, but she calculates every risk until excitement evaporates. She tells herself, if I fail, my family will suffer. She does not ask for a lower stakes trial. She does not outsource parts of the project. So the idea dies in her head. Years later, she asks friends how they built businesses. She uses the same stories of bad timing to justify what she never attempted. Or imagine a man who grew up watching a parent lose everything in a crisis. He internalizes a prophecy. Loss is inevitable. That prophecy becomes a script. When money arrives, he buries it in safety but never invests in ideas that could elevate him. He fears temptation so much he avoids mentorship or markets. His life becomes a sequence of safe choices that prevent any lift. These are not isolated episodes. They wire the nervous system to expect shortage. Once wired, the brain becomes a proof machine. It sifts the world into evidence that confirms the scarcity story. This is not a metaphysical curse. It's cognitive coherence. The brain prefers patterns that defend a narrative. It will find facts to confirm itself. You may be asking, is this simply about money? No. Money is the mirror. The pattern shows up across health, time, and emotional availability. People who believe in scarcity will ration their time the same way they ration cash. They will not commit to friendships if they sense cost. They will not speak up at work because attention feels scarce. The same script repeats. hold back, avoid risk, yet what they really fear is being betrayed by abundance if it arrives. They fear it will be snatched or that it will demand a part of them they cannot give. The irony is that generosity, when grounded, actually increases flow. But that is rarely what they practice. There is another layer. Some people use scarcity as virtue signaling. They claim asceticism to mask envy. They watch others succeed and call them materialistic while nursing resentment. Envy then becomes moralized as righteousness. That bitterness quietly corrodes relationships and opportunities. A person can be morally superior while internally jealous. The result is stagnation. I need to pause here and say thank you for listening this far. If this analysis resonates, I invite you to help the channel grow. We are aiming for 1,000 subscribers so these ideas reach more people. If you found something true in this conversation, subscribe and leave a comment with your city and country. It helps the work stay honest and human. Back to the point. The pattern I describe is not a single disease. It is a family of habits. Different people wear different versions. Some are overtly anxious, others present as saints. But all of them feed a central belief. The universe has only crumbs. That belief filters perception and organizes life to match. Before I move to the next step, one more critical observation. People trapped in scarcity often misread chance and risk. They treat risk as a binary, safe versus dangerous. They fail to see risk as a landscape, a map of degrees and strategies. Because their default is defense, they habitually choose the lowest visible risk. That choice hides a deeper risk, the risk of a life unlived. You are probably wondering now what shapes these tendencies. Why does one person resist abundance with pride while another welcomes it? The next part will provide clarity. There are distinct subtypes inside this tribe of scarcity. Each one has its own mechanics and its own dangers. Some are socially acceptable, others quietly self-destructive. In the next section, I will break them down one by one, so you can see where you belong. Which subtype are you? We'll find out next. These scarcity minds are not all identical. They share a root, but wear different faces. I will label 4 subtypes so you can recognize patterns in yourself and others. I do this not to stereotype, but to make the diagnosis precise. The categories help because each one requires a slightly different intervention. First, the financially traumatized. This person carries a wound. Maybe they lost everything in a business failure. Maybe their family faced deprivation. The story began as a real event and then hardened into identity. Their internal script is simple. I cannot trust life. Good things are fragile and temporary. It guides reaction like gravity. A typical day for the traumatized looks like this. They wake with a knot of vigilance. Email arrives with bills. They check balances 3 times before breakfast. They reject any idea that resembles risk, even when the upside is clear. If a friend offers help, they suspect strings. If a contract demands investment, they say no. They keep an emergency fund as if that fund were the only thing between them and catastrophe. At night, they replay losses as proof that abundance is a trap. Socially, they underplay joy. When something good happens, their first response is suspicion, not celebration. The root belief shapes everything. It teaches that the natural state of life is loss. Abundance is an exception, not a pattern. The consequence is gross under-leveraging of skills and connections. Opportunities that could rebuild security are avoided. The life that emerges is conservative and narrow. It is functional but brittle. If another shock comes, the trajectory is grim. If you see yourself here, know this: trauma is real. Validation is necessary. But trauma does not have to be destiny. The task for this subtype is to retrain trust in small, safe increments. The ritual is not reckless exposure. It is careful, repeated experience of positive outcomes until the nervous system rewires. One step is to accept low-risk experiments that can yield small wins, then record those wins. That is how trust grows. The second subtype is the anxious controller. This person may not have a dramatic backstory. Instead, they learn that control equals safety. They convert anxiety into systems. If I track every cent, I win, they tell themselves. That belief gives rise to hypervigilance. A day in the life of the controller is a spreadsheet narrative. Every expense is categorized. Every subscription is questioned. They open banking apps compulsively. When a new income appears, they allocate it to multiple buckets before enjoying any of it. Their partner might complain about the joylessness of financial life. They present as competent, reliable, and meticulous. But there is a cost. Spontaneity and trust evaporate. The control story says scarcity lurks everywhere and only monitoring delays disaster. The consequence is both practical and relational. Practically, the controller misses compound opportunities because money sits idle in overly safe places. Relationally, people tire of being monitored and refuse to collaborate. The controller protects the present while starving the future. The healing move for this subtype is to build a permission budget. Set aside a small percentage of income for untracked experimentation. Make it a ritual. Do it publicly with a partner or a friend. The point is not to abandon prudence. It is to prove that a modest loosening does not equal catastrophe. Third is the scarcity martyr. This one converts lack into moral capital. I don't need much, they say as a badge. They make austerity into identity. It reads noble, even spiritual. But beneath the badge is a complicated stew of pride and resentment. A day for the martyr is full of self-denial presented as strength. They will decline a raise because I don't want to be a burden to others. They will skip vacations to show dedication to work. They will take on more labor quietly. They often tell stories of how they learned to get by and expect admiration. The pattern produces moral superiority and an internal blockade against desire. The belief at the root is, wanting abundance is greed. To avoid this stigma, the martyr polices desire. The outcome is a life of shrunk ambitions and a quiet pain that gets moralized into virtue. Children of martyrs often inherit a similar script, suffering framed as righteousness. Breaking this pattern requires a redefinition of values. Desire is not moral failure. Wanting more can be a form of stewardship. More resources can mean more capacity to help others. The martyr must practice forms of receiving that are framed as service rather than indulgence. For example, allocate a portion of gains explicitly to causes you care about. Let abundance fuel generosity. This unshames desire. The fourth subtype is the economic fatalist. This person sees forces beyond their control and concludes effort is futile. They read the news and feel confirmed. To them, the system will collapse or rig itself against them. Their voice carries a prophetic tone. The whole thing is on the brink. This worldview becomes a protective story. Why try if collapse is inevitable? A day in the fatalist's life often includes rigorous scanning of doom signals. They read headlines and assemble scenarios of systemic failure. They may hoard tangible assets like gold or physical goods. They build bunkers emotionally. Ambition is pointless. Preparation is everything. The consequence is a withdrawal from long-term investment in human systems. The root belief says, larger systems decide outcomes. Individual agency is limited. The result is a life lived in anticipation of catastrophe. Opportunities that require trust in institutions, markets, or collective growth are abandoned. Relationships are suspicious because institutions and people can fail. To move away from fatalism requires reframing agency. Not denial of systemic issues, but a reassertion of sphere of control strategies. Mobilize effort where it counts. Choose communities, markets, or practices with demonstrable track records. And practice incremental bets to rebuild an evidence base that agency still matters. Across these four subtypes, a pattern repeats. The mask changes, but the engine is the same. They all interpret possibility through a deficit lens. The differences matter because each requires a specific adjustment. Traumatized minds need trust building. Controllers need permission structure. This didn't erase trauma, but it added new data. Her life shifted from defense to measured expansion. Second, James is a controller. He managed corporate budgets and was proud of it. Yet he couldn't enjoy an extra $200 in his account without reallocating it into a maintenance bucket. His partner tired of the ritual. James agreed to a permission budget of 5% monthly. They labeled it curiosity money. For the first time in years, they allowed spontaneous small investments, books, a course, a weekend show. The permission budget did two things. It produced surprise joy. It also taught James that a modest loosening did not implode their financial life. Over time, he increased the percentage and started to allocate toward growth opportunities. These two stories illustrate a principle. Change is incremental and evidence-based. Tiny experiments produce new data that the nervous system can accept. Real transformation does not happen via argument. It happens via experience. Let me be honest about the social dynamics. Some of these subtypes are admired. The controller can be praised as disciplined. The martyr can be lauded as humble. The fatalist may gain followers with his apocalyptic clarity. The traumatized can be pitted. These social validations make change harder. People cling to praise. A disciplined person will resist losing identity even when that identity is costly. Now a direct question. Which ones do you recognize in yourself? Are you the wounded survivor who trusts nothing? The person who schedules every cent? The one who turns lack into virtue? Or the doomsayer scanning the horizon? You might be a blend. Most are. Recognizing nuance is the first move toward choice. Here is a compact practice for the four types. It is not a cure, but it is a tool. Traumatized. Design a safe trial with a capped downside and measurable upside. Controller. Create a permission bucket for experimentation. Martyr. Declare an abundance for service budget to unshame receiving. Fatalist. Identify one domain where individual action demonstrably works and act there for 3 months. If you try and fail, that is data. Failures are less catastrophic when the downside is contained. The aim is not reckless optimism. The aim is a calibrated reset of expectations. Little wins compound into new wiring. Finally, know this. None of these types deserve shame. They earn their scripts under pressure. The work is to reclaim creative agency, not to pretend past harms were nothing. Compassion plus firm action is the method. You can keep your integrity while changing your habits. In the next part, one will explain the invisible law that these subtypes all respond to. It is a simple mechanic about attention and confirmation. Understanding it flips the moral story. It shows why the universe serves crumbs is not a cosmic decree, but a predictable result of where someone directs their mind. That will be the key to dismantling the pattern. Keep listening. I want to take the subtypes we just named and put them under a single roof. They are different faces of the same engine. The engine has a name. I call it the law of selective focus. It is simple and brutal. The law says this: whatever you habitually attend to grows in your experience. Attention is not neutral. It amplifies. When you train your mind to look for scarcity, scarcity shows up. When you train your body and habits to defend against loss, the world begins to behave as if loss is the most likely outcome. This is not poetic. It is a basic feedback loop. Think of attention like a radio dial. You can tune into static or you can tune into music. If you leave the dial on static, your whole nervous system learns the frequencies of noise. You begin to expect interference. You begin to mistake signal for noise. You become an expert in worst-case scenarios. You can call this realism. You can call it prudence. But the law does not care about your labels. It only responds to what you amplify. Here is the internal architecture in 4 steps. Stimulus arrives. Your mind interprets it using a story you already own. That interpretation produces an emotion. The emotion motivates a behavior. The behavior yields a result. The result then becomes evidence that the original story was true. The loop closes. The loop tightens. Eventually the loop becomes automatic. You do not decide it. You autopilot it. Consider a single stimulus. A bonus appears in your bank account. If your story says, "Good things are temporary," your mind will immediately search for signs of fragility. You will notice taxes, fees, likely expenses, family needs. You will picture the money evaporating. Anxiety surfaces. You act by locking the funds away in an underperforming account. The consequence is that the money never compounds. It is inert. That inertness becomes proof. The story renews itself. The loop runs another cycle. Or imagine a conversation in which a friend reports a business win. If your story is "growth is lucky" or corrupt, you will notice the uneven parts of the friend's path. You will rationalize why they are undeserving. You will withhold genuine curiosity. You will not ask for mentorship or partnership. The relationship becomes performative rather than generative. Opportunities that could have been shared are lost. The world, again, returns evidence in support of your original belief. This mechanism is both psychological and metaphysical in how people tend to use that word. On the psychological side, it is cognitive bias. The brain is a pattern machine. On the metaphysical side, it looks like the world is responding to the quality of your attention. Both descriptions point to the same practical truth. You shape your reality by the stories you continuously feed. There are a few things people misunderstand about this law. First, it is not a moral judgment about being careful. Prudence exists for a reason. Emergency funds, contracts, and discernment are real tools. The law is about proportion and habit. If caution is one tool among many, you are flexible. If caution becomes the only way you orient to life, the law will harden your caution into destiny. Second, this law is not instantaneous magic. It operates through accumulation. Attention nudges perception. Perception nudges feeling. Feeling nudges choices. Choices, repeated, become skill or ruin. The timeline is long, which makes the law especially treacherous. It does not collapse overnight. It compounds. Years of tiny defensive choices accrue into the structure I described earlier, a life that, from the outside, looks prudent, and from the inside, feels like a slow strangulation. Third, the law is indifferent to external fairness. Systems can be unfair. Crises can happen. The law does not deny external pain. What it clarifies is a separable variable. How much of your sustained outcome is explained by world events, and how much is explained by your orientation to events? People who collapse into the scarcity script often over-attribute effects to the world and under-attribute them to the mind. Let me give you a concrete map of how attention turns into financial and relational structure. You set up a mental priority. I will avoid being taken. That priority orients many choices. You say no to collaborations that require shared risk. You refuse to hire. You refuse to ask for advice. You refuse to invest in skills because that's a luxury. You tighten your spending on present comforts and simultaneously sabotage long-term leverage. The result is stagnation. Then scarcity becomes the explanatory story. Your mind is neat. It completes the proof. You can see the same law in the small rituals of daily life. The pantry that becomes a fortress. The emergency fund that never leaves the savings account. The habit of rehearsing worst-case conversations before you have them. All of these are forms of selective attention. They are physical artifacts of an internal radio dial stuck on frequency shortage. This law also explains why reasoning alone rarely changes anyone. If I sit with a person and prove to them logically that their fear is unlikely, they will nod and then continue the behavior. Data doesn't dislodge habit. Only new experience does. That's because the loop runs beneath explicit thought. You need to feed the system different input, repeatedly, until it rewires. One more thing. The law works both ways. It amplifies what you want as effectively as it amplifies what you fear. When a person starts to attend to abundance, to small wins, to investments in competence, the loop flips. The brain begins to notice opportunities it previously ignored. Emotions shift from dread to curiosity. Actions change from hoarding to it is where thinking becomes trapped and where a small intervention can interrupt everything. I watch the loop run in dozens of scenes. It is always the same choreography. Thought sparks an emotion. Emotion composes action. Action creates evidence. Evidence becomes the next thought. It is a simple machine, elegantly cruel. Let me run you through 3 scenes. Each begins different. Each ends the same. Scene 1, money arrives. Scene 2, an opportunity knocks. Scene 3, a relationship asks for a share. Watch closely. Scene 1, you receive an unexpected payment. A check, a refund, a bonus. Your chest tightens, not with joy, but with calculation. Somewhere under that tightness is the quiet narration. This won't last. You run through a mental ledger of possible ways the money will disappear. You tuck it away into a safe but idle account. You mark it as not to touch. Months go by. The money has not multiplied. You call that proof. You feel vindicated. The narration grows louder. Why did this happen? Because the thought, it won't last, produced a fear-based action locking rather than investing. The action produced the result you expected. Your mind collected that result like a trophy. The trophy re-inscribed the belief. The loop tightened. Scene 2. You are offered a seat at a small partnership. It requires a modest investment of time and a willingness to be visible. Your inner voice says, this feels risky. The economy is bad. Better to hold. You decline politely. 6 months later, you meet a former peer who accepted a similar role. They are not only surviving, they are scaling. You whisper, I knew this was risky. Risk was the reason you avoided it. Avoidance made the success invisible to you. Again, the loop confirmed itself. Scene 3. A friend offers to collaborate on a side project. You agree in words and then delay the work. You tell yourself small stories about why now is not the right time. The project dies of neglect. Later you explain your failure with bad timing and market conditions. The truth is softer and darker. Your fear prevented the necessary momentum. The universe did not withhold. You did. This pattern repeats in subtler forms. You bargain with yourself about how much to learn. You postpone a course because it costs too much. You avoid asking a mentor for feedback because it feels presumptuous. Each delay is an action powered by a scarcity thought. Each inaction yields smaller results. Small results pile up into a life that matches your expectation. The loop also has an emotional economy. Fear contracts. Shame hides. Anger deflects. Pride rationalizes. These feelings are not accidental byproducts. They are fuel. Fear keeps attention focused on what might go wrong. Shame keeps you quiet about your desires. Anger lets you blame the world when evidence arrives. Pride makes the script feel morally superior. The emotional system is exquisitely designed to preserve the pattern. Here is a crucial point. People inside the loop rarely see it as a loop. They see isolated incidents. They feel justified in each avoidance. And they are very persuasive in their rationalizations. That's what makes the cycle sticky. The mind is good at storytelling. It stitches a lifetime of small defensive moves into a moral narrative. That narrative keeps the loop running. I want to explain the reinforcement dynamic in a slightly different way. Imagine you are a gardener and the mind is a patch of soil. You scatter seeds of attention. If you habitually plant seeds of scarcity, you will cultivate weeds of fear. Those weeds monopolize sunlight and nutrients. When a chance at abundance arrives, it is competing with a thick mat of fear. The soil has been conditioned to favor scarcity, not because the gardener is evil, but because the gardener has been planting the same seeds for years. So how does the cycle escalate into harm? The most dangerous thing is not the initial caution. The danger is the way each avoided risk becomes a new anchor. Over 10 years, those anchors become a chain. A person who once had flexible options now has few. They call it playing it safe. I call it slow incarceration. Let me be blunt about the cost. Professionally, Missed promotions, stagnant income, skills uninvested. Financially, money kept safe in low-return accounts, never multiplied. Relationally, partnerships avoided, intimacy curtailed, generosity withheld because what if? Spiritually, a quiet shriveling of imagination, of appetite for more life. This is the tax the loop levies. You may hear this and think the worst is obvious, but there is a more insidious effect. The loop trains your perception of chance. It makes you hyper-visible to threats and almost blind to patterns of growth. Over time, you stop recognizing gradual gains. You also stop learning the skill that changes everything: calibrated risk-taking. Calibration is the muscle most neglected. People who live in scarcity do not take a single big leap or become reckless. They avoid micro-experiments that teach them how to fail safely and grow. They miss the small wins that cumulatively rewire belief. Now, notice how the loop defends itself when you attempt to intervene. You try one small experiment, and it works. You get a modest benefit. Your mind will often assume it's an exception. You will file it away as luck. That default dismissal is part of the loop. The loop prefers to keep its narrative intact. So you need to be strategic. You need sustained experiments, not one-offs. Which brings me to a critical idea: containment. To break the loop, you must design moves where downside is explicitly limited and upside is visible. Small, measured bets that can be repeated. The repetition is the signal your nervous system needs to update its priors. One successful experiment is a fluke. 10 similar experiments create a trend. The trend rewires expectation. I do not underestimate how hard this is. The loop is comfortable because it is familiar. Change always feels riskier than the status quo. But the status quo is already a risk. It is a long, steady erosion. That is the paradox. The attempt to avoid risk through chronic caution produces the very outcome you feared. So what stops people from making those contained bets? Often identity. I am the careful one, they say. Identity becomes a jail. To change, you must risk the social fiction you tell about yourself. You must accept that who you are can be updated. That is as painful as it is necessary. If you want to start unclenching, begin with one micro-experiment designed specifically to be small and repeatable. Do it publicly. Track it. Treat the data as gospel. Do not let your mind explain away wins. That disciplined approach is how the cycle begins to reverse. You have seen the loop. You have watched it run in scenes of money, opportunity, and relationship. You have felt how it hides behind virtue and pride. If nothing interrupts it, it compounds into a life of quiet scarcity. But there is always a point where the loop becomes visible enough to be challenged. That point is often painful. It can be a layoff, a relationship breakdown, a child's struggle mirrored back at you. It is the moment the loop exposes itself as a prison. What happens at that fracture is the next thing I want to explore. The fracture is either collapse or awakening. In the next section, I will describe the anatomy of that breaking point. I will show the two paths that open when the loop finally becomes too loud to ignore. One leads deeper into bitterness. The other offers a doorway to redesigning your life. Which path you take matters. The choice often begins with a single question. Years of running a loop like that usually produce weight. Not physical weight, but a felt gravity. People tell me they are tired of feeling like they live one step from disaster. They tell me the story with a weary, almost apologetic tone. I've been careful, they say. What they mean is, I have practiced keeping myself small. The moment of truth arrives when the cost becomes too loud. The breaking point rarely arrives as a cinematic collapse. It is more often a compound moment. A string of small confirmations. The car needs repair. A contract is not renewed. A friend moves away. A child asks for something you never had. These small losses add up until something inside stops saying, "This is fine." You feel hollow. You feel tricked. You resent yourself and the world. At that instant, the person faces a fork. I have watched two trajectories repeat 1,000 times. One path is the descent into bitterness. The person doubles down. They clean the wound with justifications. They find comfort in righteous scarcity. They become the moralist of lack. At least I was right, they say, and live with that as a truth. Then his daughter needed tuition beyond what his emergency-only account allowed. He felt shame and anger. For years he had believed that control equaled safety. The crisis made that belief unsustainable. Marco did something small and radical. He accepted that his identity as the careful provider was costing his daughter's future. He designed a 6-month plan that allowed for a modest curriculum change and a part-time consulting gig for himself. He limited the downside by using a sliding scale for hours. He agreed publicly with his daughter and a friend to be accountable. The first 3 months were shaky, but the work produced a new stream of income. More importantly, the repeated small wins rewired his expectation. He began to believe he could take measured risks. That belief opened him to bigger, smarter bets. There is another story of someone I will call Lila. She was the moral martyr. She refused raises, turned down investments, and wore austerity like an emblem. A health scare made the emblem feel fraudulent. At the clinic, she saw the toll of deferred caregiving and unshared resources. Lila started with the ritual I teach later, 21 nights of inventorying abundance and noting one small courageous act per day. She promised to accept a gift without guilt. That small permission changed her posture. People around her noticed. Offers arrived. Not magic, but momentum. These stories show the anatomy of the break. Pain, acknowledgement, small experiments, public accountability, accumulation. That sequence is the rehabilitation plan. It is not guaranteed, but it is reliable. A crucial dimension of the breaking point is that it often intersects with social feedback. The community either encourages the old script or invites a different future. People who have parents, partners, or friends that prize caution will find the fork harder to take. Social praise for being responsible becomes a powerful conservator of the loop. Conversely, a single ally who says, "Try with me," can be catalytic. There are psychological mechanics at play I want to be specific about. The nervous system learns safety through repeated, low-threat exposures. After trauma or long conditioning, the brain signals danger on small cues. The remedy is graduated exposure. You must create situations where the downside is bounded and the upside is visible. Each completed experiment sends a record to the brain. This was survivable. Over time, the threshold for action lowers. Here is what most people get wrong about rupture. They expect a single revelation to be enough. They think once they see it, all habits will fall away. They underestimate how much behavior is stored in automatic, embodied circuits. Seeing is necessary, but not sufficient. You must translate seeing into habit by designing repetition cycles that produce perceptible outcomes. And this is why identity work matters. If you decide to change, but still speak and behave as the old identity, the nervous system will not accept the new scripts. You must declare small changes in identity publicly. Say it aloud. Act slightly differently. Ask someone to hold you to it. The social dimension accelerates rewiring because it creates accountability and new evidence streams. Let me be practical about timing. The break can feel sudden, but it is often the end of a decade-long accumulation. The work that follows is also not instantaneous. Most people require months of structured experiments to feel a real shift. That is fine. The aim is not instant sovereignty. The aim is incremental increase in options. There is also loss in the process. When you change, some relationships shift. People who benefited from your scarcity may resist. You must be ready to lose certain moral positions that once defined you. This loss is not punishment. It is a pruning necessary for growth. Finally, understand that breaking does not mean reckless optimism. The goal is not to abandon prudence, but to rebalance it. You keep emergency plans. You keep skillful caution, but you add parallel muscles. Generosity with time and resources when appropriate. Openness to leverage. Willingness to invest in capacity. That dual posture, practical prudence, plus calibrated expansion is what the other side of the fork looks like. If you are listening and feel the weight I described, there is a small test you can do tonight. Ask yourself, what is one modest experiment I could run for 30 days that has a clear cap on downside and a visible upside? Do not answer with language about maybe one day. Be specific. Put it in your calendar. Tell one person. That tiny move may be the first real step out of the loop. In the next part 1, we'll give you the exact reprogramming ritual I use with people who come into my work. It is simple, structural, and designed for nervous systems shaped by scarcity. It is not a pep talk. It is a disciplined practice that produces data. If you are ready to move from noticing to doing, that ritual is where to start. I want to be blunt about what changes and how. The new pattern is not wishful thinking. It is a practical reorientation of attention, belief, and behavior. It asks you to move from an identity of scarcity to a posture of measured expansion. That is the core trait. You keep your prudence. You add experiments that teach the nervous system safety. You change the story you tell yourself, and you test that story in the small acts of your day. That is the new pattern. Call the new pattern calibrated receiving. Calibrated receiving means you assume abundance is present enough to try small moves. It does not mean reckless spending or fantasy. It means you protect fundamentals while deliberately exposing yourself to repeatable, bounded risks that can produce visible upside. The point is repetition. Repetition converts fluke into trend. Trend rewrites expectation. Expectation changes feeling. Feeling changes action. Action changes results. Start here. Say to yourself out loud, I will make small bets where the downside is capped and the upside is visible. Say it now. Saying it is not performative. It tracks your voice into the body. It begins to dislodge the old identity. After that, choose your first set of bets. Design is everything. A good bet follows 3 simple constraints. First, downside capped. Know what you will lose and accept it. Second, time-bounded. Give the experiment a fixed window to run. Third, public accountability. Tell one real person what you will try. The combination of these 3 factors dissolves the paralysis that comes with infinite, undefined risk. It replaces guessing with a plan. Let me make this concrete. The ritual I use is short, repeatable, and hard to explain away. I call it the inventory and small bet cycle. It lasts 21 days. Every evening you do 2 things in a pocket notebook or an app. 1. Record 5 concrete instances of abundance you saw that day. 2. Record 1 small bet you either took or committed to take the next day. No judgments. No wishful lists. Concrete items only. A full pantry. A clear hour to study. An email that replied. A friend who offered a contact. Then the small bet. A call, a $5 ad test, offering a free consult, posting 1 piece of work publicly. Why 21 days? Because short bursts produce novelty, but long enough repetition is needed for the nervous system. 21 days is a compromise between meaningful repetition and human attention. It is also psychologically tidy. You can commit to 3 weeks. 3 weeks creates a data set. Data breaks stories. You must measure. At the end of each week, read the entries. Count how many times you recorded abundance. Count how many bets you made. Note the outcomes. Don't analyze narratively. Tabulate. Data sits outside story. Data neutralizes explanation. If you feel a win and explain it away as luck, the table will say otherwise. 10 small bets that return 2 modest wins are not luck. They are signal. That signal is what your mind has been starving for. There are forms for the small bet. Keep them practical. A small bet could be offering a paid trial to 3 people. It could be asking your manager for 30 minutes of feedback. It could be putting a price on a skill you offer and listing it publicly for a week. It could be investing 1% of an emergency cushion on a learning course. It could be accepting an invitation you would normally decline because of bad timing. The specific bet matters less than the constraints. You must make these bets public to 1 person. I do not mean a performative social media post. I mean a named witness. Tell a friend, a spouse, a colleague. Ask them to ask you in 7 days, what happened? The witness performs 2 functions. 1. Shame reduction. Saying aloud reduces the first week produced 3 responses. 2 were polite declines. 1 became a paying client at 20% of his target. He recorded that and kept pushing. Week 2, he tweaked pricing. Week 3, a referral arrived. By the end of 21 days, he had a predictable side income. More important, his inner narration shifted. He recorded wins. He could not store them away as luck without lying to a friend. The repetition rewired his expectation. Marco's identity as careful provider softened. He did not become reckless. He simply learned to move. Lila, she had a different barrier. Her scarcity was moralized. She wore austerity like an emblem. Her ritual began with noticing abundance in social currency. A neighbor who shared baked goods, a library with free courses, a health checkup that was normal. Her small bet was practice. She accepted a small gift without guilt and said, "Thank you," without qualifying it. She also committed to 1 visible act of generosity a week for 3 weeks. The first acceptance felt like betrayal. The first act of generosity felt awkward. But with each day's inventory, she noticed a pattern. Generosity made space for receiving. People responded. Offers arrived. She learned that giving did not drain her. It circulated value. The ritual overturned her story that abundance equals moral corruption. Those examples showed different starting points. Same mechanics. Start with small, protective bets. Track daily abundance. Make outcomes public. Repeat. Now the hard part. The ritual will expose fragile edges. You will see where scarcity anchors itself. You might lose friends. You might irritate a partner. People who benefited from your scarcity either materially or morally may feel threatened. That is real. Anticipate friction. Name it. Do not confuse social discomfort with a moral wrong. Some pruning is expected. When you change posture, not everyone walks with you. That is part of the price of growth. If you want to increase the speed of learning, add 3 levers. 1. Shorten the testing window to 2 weeks for specific bets where you need rapid feedback. 2. Increase accountability by adding a small weekly report to a group of 2 or 3 people. 3. Create an error budget. Allow yourself a limited number of failed bets without punishment. Failure is information. Treat it as such. You must also schedule the ritual in your day. I recommend the evening slot because the brain consolidates experience overnight. Right before bed, right? That one habit is deceptively powerful. It links conscious attention with subconscious consolidation. The mind begins to notice abundance because you habitually look for it. Habit is the gatekeeper. Language matters. Use neutral, procedural language when recording. Don't say, "I was lucky." Say, "One client paid X and I offered Y." Descriptive language prevents explanatory habits that reimpose the old story. The notebook is an evidence ledger, not a sermon. Finally, the ritual asks for 2 identity moves. 1. Adopt a humble claim that is repeatable. I am someone who experiments with small, bounded bets. Repeat it in the morning once. 2. Declare 1 public commitment. I will run the inventory and small bet cycle for 21 days and report weekly. Say it to the witness. Those 2 moves, an internal mantra and a public pledge, create the scaffolding that helps the nervous system accept a new baseline. If you do these things, you will not be cured in a week. You will start collecting records. You will start to build a counter-narrative made of real outcomes. And the mind that once found evidence of lack everywhere will begin to find patterns of possibility. The next part shows how that begins to reshape real life. If you want to know what the future looks like when these micro movements accumulate, watch what happens to decisions, finances, and relationships when repetition meets patience. The next piece is the view of life a year into the practice. When the new pattern begins to hold, change does not arrive as fireworks. It arrives as fewer missed calls. It arrives as one better decision after another. The shifts are small, visible and cumulative. You start to catch yourself pausing where you once panicked. You start to ask, how can I make this possible? Instead of, is this a trap? That question is the hinge of possibility. The first visible change is perception. The world you move through looks differently because your attention has been retrained. Opportunities that used to slide by unseen stand out. An invitation to consult becomes a small product. A refund becomes capital for a test. A hobby becomes a side income. The difference is not magic. It is pattern recognition. Your mind begins to map probability curves where it once saw only cliffs. I will give you 3 scenes to watch. Each is ordinary. Each is structural. Scene 1. A small promotion. In the old pattern, you would have dismissed it as lucky timing or a trap. Under a new pattern, you pause. You calculate the upside. You offer a negotiation that is bounded. 3 months of added responsibilities in exchange for a performance review and a modest salary bump. You write the plan. You track outcomes. If the promotion fails to deliver, your downside is limited to a defined temporary workload. If it succeeds, you increase leverage. Small bets stack into larger professional moves. Scene 2. An unexpected check. Under scarcity, you stash it. Under calibrated receiving, you divide it. A fixed percentage moves to safety. Another fraction funds a defined experiment. A tiny portion goes to a visible act of generosity. The money does not vanish. It is strategically placed. You watch the experiment for 3 weeks and record results. You no longer tell yourself the story, money disappears. You build a practical relationship with resources. Scene 3. A relationship asks for more contribution. Scarcity habit will tighten. Calibrated receiving negotiates. You define shared parameters and test them. You keep the experiment small. You do not default into moral martyrdom or rigid hoarding. You create a contract. You test it. You record its effect on trust and resources. These micro-experiments teach you what generosity looks like when grounded in capacity. Those scenes are the anatomy of a future different from failure by avoidance. They show how the new pattern rewires choices. They are not fairy tales. They are design practices. You will notice financial differences within months. Not always huge increases. Often it is better cash flow, fewer late fees, a modest side income that becomes reliable. Those are important because they create breathing room. Breathing room is the resource confidence feeds on. It allows you to scale. It allows you to be generous without panic. It rewrites the internal ledger. Relationships also change, and this is quieter and more consequential. When you stop guarding resources like a scarcity martyr, you either strengthen relationships or expose them. People who are comfortable with your scarcity posture will react. Some will welcome the change. Some will resist it. That friction is a filter, not punishment. It separates leverage from lip service. It frees you to form alliances that are generative. You might think this will make you recklessly optimistic. It will not. The new posture is pragmatic. It keeps contingency plans. It protects essentials. But it grows a muscle you once avoided. The tolerance for calibrated failure. That tolerance is what allows you to iterate. The network that responds to iterative moves rewards consistency. People prefer a neighbor who tries and adjusts, not one who never tries. I promised you stories of transformation. Here are 2 more to deepen the image. The first is Elena. She was always the practical one in her family. She saved obsessively and refused to outsource anything. Her savings were a monument to avoidance. Elena began the inventory and small bet cycle because her son wanted to study abroad. The first week, she recorded small abundances she had always assumed were irrelevant. A skill in logistics, a freelance contact, a scholarship database her colleague had sent. Her small bet was to offer a short planning service to local families considering the same program. She set a capped offer. 5 hours of planning for a fixed fee and a money-back clause if the family did not proceed. She posted it in a local group. 3 bookings arrived. The revenue did not transform her net worth, but it built a bridge. Elena began to monetize what she already knew. A year later, she had an adjunct consultancy informing her son's tuition strategy. The dignity she felt was not the money alone. It was the sense of creative agency she had been denying. The second is Jamal. He had a long history. You hold a two-part internal question. What is the real cost of this action? And what will counting for it teach me? Counting is key. When you design experiments to teach something, you reframe failure as curriculum. You reframe success as evidence. The old pattern trained you to read the world as a zero-sum ledger. The new pattern trains you to see nested economies. Some resources are finite in the short term. Many resources expand with circulation, attention, credibility, competence. You invest in these and watch them compound. There will be relapses. That is inevitable. You will also face external shocks. A market shift, an illness, a bad hire. The new pattern does not inoculate you against reality. It changes the typical shape of your response. You learn to mobilize small bets to stabilize the situation instead of defaulting to resignation. That distinction is crucial. One more practical note. The ritual scales. At 3 weeks you have data. At 3 months you have a trend. At 12 months you have evidence. At each point you can increase the scale of your bets proportionally to the signal. This is how marginal gains become leverage. It is how small bets turn into strategic allocations. Imagine this. 1 year after starting, you are not a different person overnight. You are someone with a different portfolio of responses. You have a list of small wins. You have repeated the practice long enough that your nervous system treats certain moves as survivable. You stop living as if every gain invites immediate theft. That change of baseline alters everything. Career decisions, how you parent, whether you say yes to new possibilities. If you hear this and think it sounds simple, you are right. It is simple. Simplicity is not the same as ease. The work is in the repetition and the courage to be mildly embarrassed. Most people overestimate the importance of a single revelation and underestimate the slow power of cumulative experiments. This is why the ritual is not a pep talk. It is work you will do in the dark evenings with a cheap notebook. Next, I will speak about the price and the losses that come with changing. You will not leave everything intact. Some relationships will recalibrate. Some moral positions you clung to will be untenable. The choice to grow demands pruning. That pruning hurts, but it is also honest. If you are ready to keep going, the final section will ask you to face a question most people avoid. Where are you in this story, and what is the single smallest step you will take tonight to shift it? We began this journey by naming the pattern. A mind trained to find scarcity will create scarcity. We traced the anatomy. We described the law that governs it. We offered a ritual. Now the question becomes personal. Where are you in this loop? Are you still collecting proof that life is stingy? Or have you begun gathering evidence that it responds to your posture? I will not soften this for comfort. If you remain where you are, the pattern compounds. Small avoidances calcify into few options. Small refusals aggregate into lost decades. That is the cost we make light of when we call ourselves practical. Practicality, in this pattern, can be a synonym for a slow shrinking. The alternative is to move. If you move, you will pay a very different price. You may lose some social applause for austerity. People who admired your carefulness may be confused. You will have to own your decisions in public. You will make mistakes. You will feel awkward accepting help. You will sometimes fail visibly. That is the price of opening. So what is the first, smallest thing you can do tonight? I want to give you one instruction that is precise, measurable, and non-spiritual. It is not a mantra. It is a practical test. Tonight, before bed, write 2 things in a single notebook. 1. Name exactly 5 instances of abundance you witnessed today. Make them concrete. A full meal, a helpful email, a preserved hour of focus, a client who paid on time, a neighbor who smiled. 2. Choose one small bet you will take tomorrow. Define the downside in 1 sentence and set a date in the calendar to review it. Tell one person you will do it. Do this for 21 nights. That is the entire experiment. No more, no less. The rest is discipline. You will feel absurd on night 2. You will feel doubtful on night 7. Do it anyway. Data accumulates. Your mind will revolt against the evidence at first. Resist the explanation. Read the ledger. I want you to pause and ask one honest question. What story have I been using to justify my small life? Answer with a single sentence. Not a poem. Not a speech. One sentence. You may find it ugly. That is useful. When you can name the story, you begin to see its architecture. I also want you to say, aloud, one affirmation that is not a fantasy. Try this. I will run small, bounded tests for 21 days and report the results. Say it now. The affirmation is procedural. It binds you to action, not belief. Action will make belief true or false. That is exactly what you need. If you complete the 21-day cycle, expect 2 possible outcomes. 1. You will collect enough failures to refine your bets. That is useful and expected. 2. You will collect enough wins that your mind can no longer explain them away. Those wins are the seed of a new expectation. That new expectation will change how you choose. Remember, change requires both tenderness and rigor. Be gentle with your old story. It protected you in some ways. It gave urgent focus to threats. But be ruthless with its authority. It does not get to veto experiments indefinitely. A practical checklist to keep you honest. Cap downside. Set a time box. Announce to a witness. Tabulate. That formula breaks the tyranny of infinite risk. It turns imagination into repeatable practice. It transforms psychological protection into tactical test. If you are someone who has been waiting for permission, here it is. Permission is cheap. What matters is a public, structural commitment. If you are someone who is used to acting but lacks restraint, use the cap. If you are someone who is paralyzed, use the witness. If you are someone who moralizes austerity, use the generosity experiment. The ritual adapts. You will ask me, what if I do the work and nothing changes? My answer is candid. Nothing that is meaningful changes overnight. But you will have learned to test. You will have recorded outcomes. You will have created a history that resists your old script. If the world really had been the only variable, evidence would be thin. But you change the variable. You change your responses. Over months, change compounds. That is how the improbable becomes routine. A final note on responsibility. I do not say the universe owes you abundance. I say this, your posture matters. Your filters matter. Your actions matter. The universe, in whatever sense you use the word, responds in patterns. You can choose to be a passive recipient of your old habit or an active designer of new experiments. Both are choices. Now a last, practical invitation. If you complete your first 21-day run, do 2 things. 1. Write a short note in your ledger about the 3 smallest things that surprised you. 2. Tell one person about one surprise. Simple. Concrete. Social proof matters. You will be amazed how often people respond with empathy or with their own small offers. That is the circulation I talked about. Before I close, answer this question honestly. If you remained exactly where you are, what would your life look like in 5 years? Picture it in 3 sentences. Then picture the life you could have if you began 21 small tests this month. Which picture feels more honest to you? Which one are you willing to act toward? Thank you for listening this far. If you stayed to the end, do one small thing for me. Share this with someone who tends to narrate scarcity. It is a small, kind act. If you want to keep following this work, write your city and country in the comments and subscribe so the conversation can continue. Tell me one small bet you will take tomorrow. I will read it. You have the ledger. You have the method. You have the witness. Now do the work.